Hi everyone. So in this video, I'm gonna talk through the part that I think we've all been waiting for, actually coding a rule. And this is gonna involve kind of bringing together all the concepts that we've covered up to this point, and still kind of introducing a couple new ones. And I think there's gonna feel like there's a bit of a jump in this video in terms of the level of thinking required. But I think once you get stuck in, you'll realize you can sort of follow a similar pattern to what I'm doing in this video, and what I'll do probably in a couple more example videos. And then from that, you'll be able to sort of do the work yourself and ask any questions to me over time to kind of clarify the pieces that are missing. So I think to get started, what I want to do is just sort of show you the issues board now. So here we are. We're in the GitHub with for the Python side code, quality of that data beta validator. Again, I'll make sure that this is linked in the summary materials, but hopefully by now you guys are familiar with it. So if I go to the issues, you can see now there's 270 issues. And what I've done is I've created a issue for every rule that needs to be validated in the 903. And you can see that these are all labeled with the error code and the sort of short description of the rule. So if you click labels here, you can see a sort of summary by label. So you can see overall we have 266 open issues with this tag validation rule, which is a tag that I've given to all the rules. And then I've tried to characterize them into simple rules, advanced rules, and external data. So things like postcodes and URN lookups would live in external data. I kind of see that as the hardest part. The advanced rules are stuff that would probably just require a bit more practice with Python and learning a bit more functionality of pandas. So we aren't going to come to those yet. What we care about today are these simple rules, and you can just click simple rule here to kind of show all of these. So you can see these are sorted just by the opposite error code because I added them in order. So I'll just sort them from oldest to newest so we can see the original ones. And I think what we'll do is we'll start with this one, which is gender code is not valid. It's quite a simple rule and it's quite easy to talk through. So if you look at the issues, they should all look the same, broadly speaking. They have the same information. So we have the error code, which is going to be 101 in this case. We have the description to display. This is all taken directly from the DAV document, so we can play with this, and there will also occasionally be slight errors. I mean, I spotted a few cases where there's slight errors in this data. But in general, this information should be good. It's worth just sort of looking at it with a bit of a critical eye to make sure it makes sense. So here we're saying the description of gender code is not valid. The data item must be either 1 male or 2 female, and the suggested coding is that the sex column must be provided, and it must be a valid value. So that's kind of two things that we need to check. And for allowed values, please see a statistic code set. I've also added back that every single issue will link back to this DAV validation document. So if you have a look at this, I mean, this is hopefully this will be familiar to most of you, but this is the list of validation checks that the DAV publishes, which is the source for all these issues. You can see like the first one right here, error code 101 is the one we're looking at. And if something looks strange in the error, it's probably because the script that I used to create this missed a piece of information from here. So it's worth maybe like double checking if something looks strange to make sure that you've got all the information. But I mean, in practice, this error is probably not going to be a really big win in terms of validation because most CMS systems will enforce this automatically, so you won't be able to enter incorrect value or no value. But in terms of kind of completeness, it'd be good to make sure the tool has everything in. So, I mean, the aim with this tool is to include all the validation rules, even the ones that are quite difficult in practice for people to break, just to make sure that we do have that coverage in case something does go wrong later on, or CMS has changed in a few years. So that being said, I think I'll now talk through how you actually go about doing the work on these issues and the sort of process you follow. So I think the first that you want to do is assign yourself to the issue. You can see that I've actually done that here because I was looking at this a bit before the video. Then once you've done that, you want to go through the same process that we talked about with Git. So we're going to basically create a branch, do all our work on that branch, then come back here, make a pull request, and add it to the repo. And the work consists of 3 things, and this is what you want to kind of bear in mind throughout this video. So it's going to be writing the validation rule itself, writing tests for the validation rule, and then adding that rule to the engine, so like to the set of rules that actually get picked up on by the front end and used. And this is gonna feel a bit different because we're now working directly in the code base, so it won't be as easy for you to kind of run the code straight away. But I'm going to talk through kind of the easiest way in my mind to develop and make sure that you catch all the issues that you might have going forward. So first things first, open up this repo in Replit. Just make sure that you're using your newest version. If you're not sure, you can always just go back here and hit run on Replit and create a new one. As far as I can tell, there's no issue with creating new repos on Replit. It's a bit kind of janky, but I think it works for our purposes. And now we're here, so we can start to do those things. So the first things first, go to version control, and there's two checks you want to make here. And again, don't worry too much about writing all this down at the moment. I will include in the summary documents all this in more detail. But first, you want to check that you're up to date with main. If not, it will say something like 2 commits behind main, and then you can click pull, which will pull all the changes. So basically, like what can happen is, say someone else is working on a rule and they add that into the code base. You're now behind on that rule, so you need to pull that back into your version of the code to then get back to the work. So now once you're up to date, you can make the branch. So if we just go back to this issue again, I've lost it now, but I think it was code 101. So error code 101, gender code not valid. Yeah. So this is issue number 12. So what we'll do is we'll make a new branch and we'll call it 12 validate 101. And I don't know, that seems like enough of a name for me. So we'll create this now. And you see, like, so again, the naming here I've used is the issue number followed by just something to remind me what this branch is for. And I think the only thing you should be thinking about here is that you don't want to create branch names that are the same as other people, because then you might both accidentally end up working in the same place, and it can be very confusing. So the best practice thing is to use the issue number to start with, and then just whatever you want to write after that is good. So we'll create this branch and give it its usual bit of time, and now we see we're up to date with that branch, and we can begin to do the work. So now that's been created, what we're going to do is we're going to actually talk through the testing side first before we actually go to write this rule. And what this means is that you can sort of set yourself up in such a way where you've described what you want to write before you start writing it. So for the tests, the way that testing works is you're basically writing functions called test functions that test different aspects of your code. And these are designed to sort of describe expected functionality and then kind of assert that the output matches what you expected. So say in this case, we know that we want the gender to be either 1 or 2. So what we can do is try passing it a data frame which has, say, a gender equal to 3, and kind of assert that it does identify that row has a validation error. So on top of that, I've also written in this test integration file, and these aren't that complicated to read through, some kind of higher level tests that try to test everything that we've configured. Because if you remember, we've got this config.py, and this lists all the errors that we configured. Like right now, we've still only got these 2 fake errors, but I'll be taking those out shortly. And this list will eventually be the kind of ground truth for all the errors that we've actually managed to write so far. And in the integration test, we import that list here, and you can see that basically what I do here is test all configured errors and make sure that these functions you guys are writing are returning the right things and in the right format. So I'm going to sort of describe the format here that you should be using, but you should basically get a testing error if you aren't returning the right format. So I mean, it checks things like, is the error code a string? Is the error description a string? Is the list of fields the right thing? And like, here I'm checking, is this like, does this function kind of operate correctly on the data that you'd expect? So I try passing some empty inputs. Well, these might well come up later on in the video, so don't worry too much about reading through these in great detail. But basically, these are sort of the tests that will apply to all your errors and kind of check things that should be true about all the errors. But we want to kind of add some things that will be true for specific errors. So kind of for this one, it's kind of testing that gender specific behavior. So let's sort of go here first, and what we'll do is we'll just write a sort of basic definition for this error. So we can say def, and I think so. All of our errors are going to live in this file, in this validators file. So I think it's important just to think about a reasonable way of naming these. I would suggest we just call them validate underscore then the error code, which in this case is 101, just to make sure that way again we're not both like two people aren't defining errors with the same name. And what we'll do now is we'll just pass on this. So the pass just means like don't do anything with this yet. So this is now just a function that does nothing and returns nothing. But we can come back and fill that in later. So then if we go to the config, we can add this to the configured errors. And then what we'll do is I'll talk through the kind of testing side, because now we've added this error, it's configured. Obviously we know that it's not going to work. So we can check and make sure that these tests pick up on that and catch that. So in order to do that, go back to your console tab here. The first thing you have to do is, so we've sort of loaded in the code from Replit. What we haven't done is actually installed this code so that we can run it and test it. So in order to do that, you have to run a command called poetry space install, and then hit the enter key. This will take probably a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cut here and kind of shorten this down for the video. And you can see now that that's finished and it's installed the current project, the 903 validator here at the bottom. So now that you have this installed, and hopefully, so this is something you're going to have to do every time that you like run on Replit and create a new REPL. So if you sort of try and make sure that you're always working in the same REPL, you should only have to run this once, and it should sort of save that state going forward. So once you've done that, you can just run the tests that are currently here. And you do that by running pytest. And you can see what's happened here. And let's sort of just scroll up a moment for this output to get a sense of what we're looking at. So I ran pytest, and this is the name of the kind of testing library that we're using to write these tests. And you can see this picks up on 3 files: test, testing gress, which is testing some of the internal code. Those will pass, so green dots. Test types also pass, and then test integration, this middle one, they all fail. And these all fail because of the fact that we've written this function that doesn't return the right thing. And you can see, look here, I mean, some of these errors aren't going to be the most verbose in the world because we've really not done anything to even try and write a proper function. But it's good to see that they're failing, because you can see here it's just struggling to unpack that error into an error code and an error function. And I think yeah, so, and you can see at the bottom here, you can see everything that failed. So the test all configured errors failed, test all configured error functions failed, both for the empty input, for the input with fake data, and a totally empty input. So how do we? So like the idea with doing this kind of work is that this is actually how you're going to run and check that your code's doing what you want. So what we'll do is we'll go to the validator section again, and we'll start actually writing this code out now, and we'll come back to these tests in a second. So, and we can sort of remind ourselves how to write these errors. So these errors should do 2 things. They should return a error definition, which you can see, like say in this fake error, is a code description and the list of affected fields, and a validate function, which is the kind of function that will run on this kind of dictionary of all the available values, and that will return the list of rows where the validation error has occurred, if there are any, or just return an empty dictionary if there aren't any validation errors. So let's go ahead and write the error definition for this, because I mean that we can do just straight from reading the issue. So we know the code is going to be 101. Access here, error code 101. We know the description to display is going to be gender code is not valid. And we know that the affected fields for this, and again you can see it here, is sex. So we'll add a list, but with only 1 value, sex. Obviously, like some of the future errors might affect more than 1 value, so that's why this is a list rather than just a single value. And what we'll do is we'll write this validate function, but just pass for the moment, and then I'll return error and validate. So we've got the error defined. However, we haven't actually written any other code to actually check this yet. So this is just going to return nothing. And then we're returning it in this sort of 2 two return values form, like kind of this tuple. So the first part is the error definition, the second part is a function. So let's see how this changes the outputs from these tests. So if we run PyTest again, so you press up and enter. So what we're seeing now is that because this is return none, we aren't able to actually pass the test or configured error functions test. So we're still failing all three of the error function tests because we haven't actually defined a proper function that works well yet. However, we're actually now passing the test errors test because we defined a proper error. And if sort of at a very basic level, say that I actually now make sure this is returning something in the right form. So if I return an empty dictionary, this, in the language of the error validation, what this means is literally it's just saying that there are no validation errors at all in any of the tables. So like say, if you remember, like say that I wanted to indicate that the header table has validation errors on index 1 and 2, I would return something like this. So the kind of simplest case is that you say, okay, there's actually nothing, there's no data anywhere on anything being wrong. So if we return that and then run the PyTest again, we actually pass all these tests, which is quite interesting, I think, because obviously we're now passing everything, but you haven't actually written any code yet. And this kind of forms like the smallest stub which would work for doing this kind of work. However, we now want to kind of demonstrate that this doesn't actually do the task that we set out to do. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the tests. We're going to write a test that describes the behavior that we want us to have, and then we're going to come back here and iterate on this function until it passes that test. This is a process called test-driven development, and it's quite a nice way of kind of articulating your work because you start with the outcome you want and then figure out how to get there. So if I add a file here called test_validators.py, I mean this is probably something that I could have already added before, but we'll add it for the first time here, and then I think all the other tests will iterate from that. Then we'll say from validator 903 dot validators import star. So here I'm just saying import every name from the validators file. So that's all these functions, validate 101, fake error, etc. This is just, I mean, we could also list them out, each of them out by hand. This is just like a nice shorthand because we're expecting there to be about 200 functions when we're all said and done here. So I'd rather kind of just do it quickly. Then to write a test, again, it's a function definition. So I write def test, but it has to start with test underscore. So as long as it starts with test underscore, the testing system will pick it up and collect it as part of the tester in this file. So we'll call this test validate 101. And again, I would suggest that for each function we write, there's an associated test, which is the same name as a function name, but beginning with test underscore and in this file. So we talked about kind of what this might look like already. So I think what we want is to kind of create some data that we expect to fail to sort of be picked up on as a validation error, and then write a test that checks if that's picked up on, and then we can check and see if our system actually does that. So what we'll do is we'll create this kind of fake data first. So what we'll do is we'll make some kind of fake data here, and we'll say what this will look like will be just the sex column because that's what we care about. And we'll add 4 values. So we'll have 2, like 1 and 2, which should both pass. And then we'll add a value 3, which should fail. And then we'll add a sort of missing value. We actually don't have pandas here, so I can very quickly import pandas at the top here too. And you can see, so now we've got these, this is our sort of fake data. So this is going to be kind of a data frame with just one column, which is this sex column, which is what we're testing. And this is kind of a good thing to wrap your head around, that we don't need to create an entire set of fake 903 data to test this one thing. We only care about kind of a table that has this column that we're checking for. So then our fake sort of DFs that we're going to be passing will look sort of like this. So it'll be a dictionary just with one key, the header, and then that value is going to be that fake data. So now we can actually call our function and get back the error definition, which we aren't going to use, and the error function, which we are going to use. And that's going to be validate 101. So for the error definition, we don't really need to test anything to do with this, unless you really want to check that the affected fields is set correctly. most of the testing to make sure this is of the right type and everything makes sense is done in the integration test. So I would say when you're working on a new rule, you shouldn't really need to worry that much about testing the error definition. However, the error function we definitely do need to test. So if we call this error function on this fake data that we created, it should obviously not throw an error, and if it does throw an error, the test will pick up on that as well. But otherwise, we kind of know the format that we want this result to look like. So we want this result to be basically saying, so in this data frame, we aren't expecting an error in row 0 or in row 1, but in row 2 and row 3, we're expecting an error. So our expected result looks something like this, right? So we have the table where the errors are, which is the header table, and the list and the sort of list of error locations, which will be 2 and 3, because again, 0 and 1 are fine, 2 and 3 are not fine. So that's what we're expecting. Then, and just as a reminder, if you're ever unsure about the kind of format of this, if you go to the config, you can see here kind of the expectation for how this for the keys in here. So the keys are going to be named the same thing as the keys in this column names dictionary. So header, episodes, deck, reviews, UASC, and in a short time I'll be adding the other sort of tables that aren't here yet. And then the values, obviously, so this is describing how to spot these files, and that's how this is used. This is used to check the uploaded files match and identifying which CSV files which. However, it won't be how we go about doing the creating the input object. So the input object is these keys, but then the value is actually the data frame for that object. Anyway, bit of an aside, but good to be aware of when you're first looking at this. And I'll try and document this as well in the summary materials as much as possible, and any other documentation that you might need. So this is what we're expecting. So now we need to complete the test by adding an assert statement. So we write assert that the result is equal, so double equal signs, because we're sort of checking this is true basically to this dictionary. So now we've written this test, we can go ahead and run it either by running PyTest, which will collect all the tests and run them, and we can see immediately we failed this test because it says here assert that the empty dictionary is equal to header 2.3. I'll just expand this out to make it a bit clearer. So you can see in this test we assert the result, and you can see that the empty dictionary is not equal to this because we know that our function currently just returns an empty dictionary. It might also be easier to just run the tests in the values file. So in that case, you can just run pytest on that file. So pytest test values.py. Just as a quick sort of note for those of you who aren't familiar with using a terminal, if you type te, for example, and then hit tab, it will expand that into the full file name. And again, write test v and hit tab, it will expand that into the full file name. It's kind of a time saver when you're doing this sort of thing down the road. So yeah, if we run this, you can see it only collects tests for that one file. And again, we see the same errors. So we've now defined the problem. Let's go and fix it. So let's go back to our code for this function and actually fill this in. So what do we want to do? So we want to, first things first, we want to get the header file, right? So let's extract that from here, because as I described, this is sort of a dictionary, right, of where the keys are the table names and the values are the sort of data frames. Then we want to basically add in this sort of like code list that we're expecting. So we're expecting, let's say, 1 and 2. So what we can do then is we can write this as whether the sets column. So obviously what we want to check is whether the sets column is in this code list. So hopefully you might have found this in reading through pandas before, but if not, pandas has a very easy function for sort of returning true or false depending on whether or not something's in a list. So we can write pandas header sex is in code list, and we'll call this the sort of mask, because masking is kind of this term where you say like, okay, so it's true if this is true and it's false if this is false. So when you then apply this mask to a pandas data frame, it will only show the rows where it's true, or to a list, or to anything else. And if you think about it, this should actually solve both of these errors, both the 3 and the missing value, because neither of those are in this list of 1 and 2. So it should, in theory, return false for both of those. However, we actually want to get the locations where it's false, so like where this is missing to return, rather than the locations where it passes. So in order to do that, we'll say like, so validation errors mask is going to equal to the tilde, which is, sorry, I have to find the right button on my keyboard here, which is that one, and then mask. And this is just shorthand for not. So what this does is it takes this, and then every true is changed to a false, and every false is changed to a true. So this now describes all the locations where this is not true. So basically where the gender is not in the code list. So the last thing we need to do is to get the validation error locations, right? So we'll call this validation error locations and write that as headers index, which is a list of all the locations, but only where this mask is not, where this validation error mask is true. So we can write that like that. And I'll expand this so you can see more easily. So that's our list of locations here. And then finally, we just need to return the output. So the output says, okay, we want this to, this is a list of locations in this error file. So we'll return validation error locations. So there's a few minor errors here which will be caught by the test. So, but I want to sort of demonstrate that. So this is a good sort of initial run, and we'll see what comes out when we actually run the test. So first things first, let's see if this actually passes our test for the specific functionality. And we can see, you see, so this has actually failed, and this is a bit of a confusing error. So what it's saying is that it's sort of struggling to match the truthiness of your result to the truthiness of this. And what's actually happened here is when we return this, the validation error locations, this actually is not in the right form because it's still kind of this pandas index object, and we want it to be in a list. So I mean, if you look at how this is solved elsewhere, what I've done is I've called toList on these to make sure that they actually pass the right kind of thing. So we can do that exact same thing here and call toList. And now if we run that test again, we should see that it passes, and it does. So now that's really good. That means that we've actually written this, and it does what we think it does. So we're now like 99% of the way there. The last step then is just to check that we haven't, in doing this, failed those initial integration tests. Also bear in mind that if you forget to run these tests, they will actually be run again before any of this code gets merged by GitHub. So if anything fails here, I'll see that, or whoever is reviewing will be able to see that before it goes in. But let's just run all the tests. So I'll run PyTest again. And you can see what's failed here is passing a totally empty input. So one of the integration tests that I use is, can your code handle if just dfs is an empty dictionary? And this exact situation won't happen, but it sort of simulates like, okay, so what if they don't upload a header file? What if they only upload a episodes file? There's some errors that would make sense to check only on the episodes file. So I don't see an issue with like trying to support that behavior. However, it means when you're writing your validation, you need to just handle that case where basically you can't find a header file. So what we'll do is at the top here, I'll just write a little if statement and say if header is not in this initial thing that we passed, we just want to return an empty dictionary, because we basically say, okay, well, if there's not even a header data frame, we can't say anything about the error. So we're just gonna say that this error doesn't fire at all because we haven't been able to actually find any information that describes it well. So if we then run PyTest, we should then see that we're passing, and that's it. So that is the whole rule written. So now you go back to your version control. This sort of this is always a bit slow, but it does take us time to sort of load up. You can see how it's like I'm having a bit of a minor issue with Replit, but it's now connected, and hopefully if I just sort of flick back and forth through this, there we go. You see, I've been having a couple of these minor issues with the platform. I think this is sort of thing where when you're doing this work more often, it's definitely easier to work locally. But for this project, I think we're going to have to sort of deal with these teething issues as and when they come out. But you can see anyway. So back to this, you can see that we've got this 3 changes. So we've modified the config file, the validators file and the test validators, which is a new file here, but going forward, all the tests will just be added to there. So that'll be more like a just a modify, same as these. And I'll say added the 101 validation rule. Then we commit and push here. And what we should see is that once this sort of completes, and you can see here it's already kind of picked up on it. We go back to GitHub, go back to the main code, and I see, 12 validate 101 had a push less than a minute ago. So we just hit this button to compare and pull. You can see it's already filled in the kind of commit message. And I'll write, added the gender checking 101 validation rule. I'll also mention here that we added the test validators file, because that's kind of a change that we wouldn't necessarily normally be doing. And then I'll say this closes issue number 12. And that's the sort of bits of information that you want to have in here. I'll obviously assign myself to this because I did the work. And there's on your side, you can assign kind of a reviewer, normally me, so that's going to be mwadips. I can't assign myself, so I'm just going to leave that blank. You don't need to remember to assign a reviewer either. I'll notice if you add stuff to this and just come review it anyway. And you can see this has now been set up. We've got that one commit out of the 101 validation rule. We've got these checks that are running to like kind of run the test. You can see all the tests passed. You can see again here that same output. And we can see that there's three changes here. So just to double check, we've added in this test, makes sense. We added in the configuration, makes sense, and we've added in the error and the function here. And yeah, that's it. So now what you would do is sort of sit here. Well, don't sit here. Go do something else. When I have time, I'd come and review this, and then I'll either leave some comments suggesting that you go back to Replit, maybe make another commit, do a bit more work, or change something. Or if it all looks good, I would just approve this and merge it into the main code base. And then that change will flow all the way back into the front end, and your error should then appear in the front end. So for now, I'll leave this open, and I'll merge this outside the video. But hopefully that makes sense. I think there's quite a lot of kind of newer concepts here, and it's a bit of a departure from running scripts, which is what we've been doing in the first few videos. But hopefully the broad idea makes sense, and I'll definitely be running through a lot more of these, both in the drop-in sessions and in more videos as well. So let's see how you guys get on. And if you're feeling a bit like, wow, I just didn't follow that at all, that's totally expected. Definitely just get in touch with me, rewatch the video, read through the material, and just take a bit of time, because this is going to feel like a bit more of a jump.